Hi. Have been asked by like multiple people about some more like actual info on the Ghostrick Purrely deck because a drunken deck profile that I did after a bottle of soju is not really too informative so much as it is just a bit of fun. But no, I've got the cards here. This isn't going to be a very high effort sort of video because this is just to explain to send to people. I'm not really going to be using this as like some kind of base of information. I'll more like send this to people, and then if they have questions, and they ask me. But I'm going to be going through the cards, and then I'll be going through like some of the sort of philosophical and decisions that you kind of make to play this, because this is a very much not a meta check in terms of cards that it plays, and the deck itself is not a meta check, but it's more of a player psychology check as much as it is a check of cards, and I'll explain what that kind of means when I start going more in depth as to some of the choices within here. But yeah, it's Purrely. So three Purrely because you use all three of them. You're Yeep shuffling back these, and if I could play more copies of this card, I totally would. It not being once per turn is really good for this deck, especially because you want to be spewing out bodies more than any other like sort of traditional Purrely deck would be doing, where it's kind of a conversation between whether you want to play 2 or 3 and give yourself more or less non-engine space. But in this, I would definitely would always rather 3. I wish I had 4. I wish I had 5. I don't know if I'd play more than 5, but like 2 per Lily. This is kind of like Slim. You can run 3 if you want. This is kind of the conversation between like 2 or 3. It depends on how hard you want to be able to find a normal summon. And it does benefit you to have 3, but it's also like space that you're dedicating to extra cats, which you generally don't want clogging up your hand if you have more than one of them. Obviously, we're maxing out on memories because it's impossible to clog your hand with these. Like, you want as many of these as possible. It's very simple. Next, the other like Purrely cards. My Friend at 3, not because it's a good starter. It's actually a really terrible starter. But play 3 of this because it's really good to find with memories. And when I talk more about the lines, I can explain some of the more specifics as to how this operates within this deck. But generally, My Friend is a good thing to find because if your Lily is stopped or you're cut off from a lot of things and your opponent's like, yeah, have more, My Friend is always more, but it's never everything. Street is just, it's worth playing 3 of. I'm not playing Terraforming, it's not worth playing into draw for, but it is quite good, and in games 2 and 3 on this deck, it can play some mind games on people, which is great fun. 1 Yeep, which you could play 2 of. Yeah, it's genuinely just down to the amount of space that you want to have dedicated to this. Like, in my non-engine, there's a 2 of card that I don't really like, and this can, like a second one of this, or like even a 3rd Lily can replace those if you really want like more engine. We've got hand traps. You've got like, in terms of generics, you have 15 slots. At least if you're playing like the amount of engine that I am. And it doesn't really matter what you play here. Like, it's just format to format. This is what I'm playing at the moment. It's different to what I played at States. At States, I had, instead of Impermanent Ogre, I had Veiler and Mourner, but they weren't all that great. Veiler's alright. Mourner is just kind of bad, to be honest. It comes up so much less than you'd think. Talents is the card that I was talking about. I don't love Talents, but I can't really think of anything better to put in its slot. And we've got the one of Coldbuy because Coldbuy is the best card in the game. That part's quite simple. And then, yeah, Ghostrick cards. This is the namesake of the deck, and this is why it's sort of a psychological check to people, because the Ghostrick line, being able to spin your wheels with this deck, for example, go summon Purrely, your opponent hand traps it, summon Purrely, your opponent hand traps it, Oh well, I have one more memory. I'm just going to go into the Ghostrick line, get 2 free cards to hand, sometimes even 3, and then just go again. Just keep guess. It's huge. And also, Tempai really struggles against this card. It can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, so they generally kind of struggle to get rid of it. They kind of have to Moonlight it or hit it with some kind of non-engine, which can be scarce, and it can be a bit difficult for them to do. Yeah. As for the rest of the extra deck, I got 1 of each of the small cats. We've got 2 big Noir, Zeus, Relinquished Anima. I think that all of these are absolutely mandatory. Each of these small cats fulfills different purposes. These are really good going second, and Beauty can also just be like a random free interruption that you can set up going first if you really want. Noir is incredibly good at setting up going first, and Plump can help you get to some really high power boards going first, and also sometimes with its banish effect can help you push through to OTK. And you've kind of got 2 flex spots. Right now I'm running Big Happiness. I don't think it's optimal, but it's better in this build than other builds of Purrely because you can OTK a lot easier when you're accessing the Ghostrick package going second. Because if you're able to find Delicious Memory through any of that, you can just kind of make Plump go into this, and then you swing in for like 15. You swing in, you get 1500 damage on. You'll have 6 materials on it, so it's plus 18. It has 2500 attack. So you go 15, 25, that's 4k, and then 6 materials, that's 12. This is 3k, and you can usually, like, if your opponent has monsters, you find whatever else damage, or you just banish all their shit with Plump. 2 Noir is actually like mandatory. Whenever you go first, you go through both of these basically every time, and the shuffle with Pearl Yeep is so much more valuable in this variant of the deck because you're shuffling back your copies of Purrely usually because you do run out of those. And then Zeus is just insanely good in this deck where you can make very high Xyz, material count Xyz monsters, and then Anima is just crazy. It's so low commitment and it can out threats so easily. And then, in terms of the other, like, I say quote-unquote flex spot, but this is, I think, the best card to put in it. It's Protector of the Agent's Moon. This is a slot where you should be running either this, Sky Striker Ace Azalea, Donna, Dagger for Hire, or SP. This is your removal slot, and it's your removal slot that should be working under Dimensional Barrier, which I find Protector of the Agent's Moon to be the best to suit that role. Purrely Happiness, this slot, ideally, should either belong to a tech piece, a Typhon, or this. But I do feel that these 2 cards are 2 of the best ones that you can have in this slot. Like, SP does fuck all for this deck. Like, it doesn't... Like, playing SP doesn't net you games. It doesn't win you matches. It can just edge out some interactions in games that you're generally already doing quite well in. Protector of the Agent's Moon does serve a very specific purpose in this deck that none of the other cards that go in this slot can do, and that is this out skill drain, and this deck gets like hard checked by skill drain. And then there's a side, doesn't matter all too much, but Alpha is in here purely for being a good board breaking tool that can also return itself to the hand, so it can serve as a discard if you want it to, i.e. you summon it, use it to bounce something, and then you just pitch it for a memory for completely free. It's really, really nice to have, and it does win a lot of games when it's good, but it's circumstantial, you know? Nib is Nib. Side decking Nib in any deck has a very similar deck building theory, especially when you're on stuff like Imperm. It's just solid. Or even Troll. It can help minimize the board that an opponent can make and make them play into Nib. Cosmic Cyclone is just really good in this format, to be honest. You hit Divine Temple, you hit Snake Eyes Diabellstar, you hit whatever the hell they put in with Divine Temple, and you hit Skill Drain, you hit whatever you want. D-Barrier, it's too strong of a card not to play. And then Evenly Matched, I'm unsure on this, but to be honest, I haven't put a ton of thought into this side deck. The only card that I'm really confident on is Alpha, and you can probably do a better job of being Alpha with like Fenrir. I just don't own Fenrirs. But either Alpha or Fenrir are the only things that I'm 100% certain should be in this side deck, as well as like D-Barrier, because D-Barrier is broken, and Cosmic because the format. Nib and Evenly are kind of just like choices for me, choices that work well for me, and choices that have worked well for me. Not just in this format, but in previous formats playing this deck. They've always been quite good, quite handy, and quite helpful. But more into like the philosophy of this deck. Now, playing against Purrely, in almost any format where Purrely has been good, the best way to stop the deck is to stop them from accessing Xyz monsters. Now, the way that you can do this is you obviously use imperm effects on the small cats, and you might think that because there's a lot of imperm effects in this format, then it's very easy to imperm these small cats and prevent Xyz plays and prevent follow-up off of My Friend and Street, and it makes it really difficult. But the fact of the matter is you don't care. And people are kind of forced against this deck because you're purely, like, you're threatening to just make a huge Noir if they don't stop you immediately. Because you're threatening to make these Xyz monsters, your opponent just has to throw their spot negation at these. Especially game 1. If they don't know you're on the Ghostrick cards, they just have to throw imperms and shit at these. And if you draw a copy of Shot and you pitch it to one of your memories, they have to try and stop these and hope you have no gas. Because as soon as you get 2 bodies on board, you just overlay them, you make Doulahan, you overlay that, you make Angel of Mischief, you declare Angel Effect, and then you add Ghostrick Shot. Now, the cool part about this is, if you've pitched one of these copies of Ghostrick Shot to a memory, Doulahan has the effect that when it's sent to the graveyard, you can target a Ghostrick card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. This is not once per turn. Angel's Search effect is not once per turn either. So, Doulahan effect, if you have a Ghostrick Shot in your hand, you can pitch it for a memory. If you don't really care about your opponent having knowledge of that, you can just Doulahan effect, add back Ghostrick Shot, activate Shot, summon Doulahan, overlay for an Angel of Mischief effect, you add your second or your last copy of Shot, depending on how your hand look, and then Doulahan effect, you can add back Shot. And as long as you have a memory in hand, you can just go for absolutely free into F-Zero, and now you have a memory to keep playing, and the only thing that can stop you is Nib Imperm, when Nib is, in fact, really bad into this deck, expressly because you have to draw it with Imperm. And you can also play to check Nib. But, like, being able to just go through 2 Purrelys, force out Imperm effects, and then go into a line that's not very committal is extremely good. And it allows you to essentially feign playing Purrely as Purrely, only to go, actually I have these Ghostrick cards, I can play again. Like, you had to save an Imperm for this or whatever. So it's just good for that. And if your hand's not great to do that, right? Or your opponent knows you're on Ghostrick cards or whatever, you can just, like, you fire off the Sleepy, you summon out a Lily, you just add My Friend, Lily effect, rank up, and just make a big Noir. Not even worry about the Ghostrick cards, because Noir is enough against a lot of decks. You're basically just choosing, am I playing Ghostrick cards this game, or am I not? And, like, it's a perfectly fine choice to make either of those decisions, especially when you know what you're up against. Especially in, like, games 2 and 3, you can understand what's going on. And games 2 and 3 are where this deck gets much more complicated, because you have to start worrying about the fact that your opponent knows the Ghostrick cards are in your deck, and your opponent can understand that you are in fact on them. So, one example that I do like to give is if you draw, for example, a Sleepy and My Friend, and then you just have 3 copies of whatever. It helps if it's another memory, but Essentially, this is crazy, but you don't operate this hand like people would expect. And once they know that you're on the Ghost Trick cards, game one, you've likely gone memory into Purrely, and then gone into Ghost Trick cards, and then just gone memory into Lily with the installation. Essentially, what you can do is you can go Sleepy, you can pitch whatever, and then you summon out your copy of Lily. You don't summon Purrely, you have to summon Lily here. Because Lily, if your opponent lets it resolve, because you already have My Friend, you can access just regular Purrely, and then regardless of whether they imperm this Purrely or not, you now have 2 level 1 bodies on board for the Dullahan, because Purrely can literally add like any Purrely card that's not a quick play spell. It can even add itself, which is really weird. But that's that, and then once you're able to go through that line, if your Purrely isn't stopped, it like might hit a memory spell or whatever, and then you can just go into Lily after that. Another line that you can do is sometimes you do want to try and resolve as much as you can in the draw phase in games 2 and 3, because your opponent's going to board in draw to this. There's no question about that, because they want to shut down the Ghost Trick line with draw while also inhibiting what you can do with this deck. And that's where Street comes into play, actually. So what you can do is you're going to be going draw phase effects anyways. So say, for example, we have a hand consisting of like Pretty Memory and Street and whatever else in it, but we're only worrying about these couple cards. It only really works with Pretty and Sleepy, because they're the only ones you can actually activate before putting anything on board. But you can go draw phase Pretty, you pitch a card, and then you summon out Purrely. You're doing this to play around draw anyways, right? And in games 2 and 3, if your opponent only has like 1 imperm effect, they're only holding 1 imperm or only holding 1 Veiler, they will let this Purrely resolve, and you'll be fine, right? You can grab, in this case, I'd grab Happy Memory. You go standby main, and then you activate Street. And now your opponent knows you have the ability to rank up. You aren't committing to anything, but they are then forced to decide whether they want to save their imperms for a Ghost Trick line that may never come, or if they just imperm your Purrely now. If you do this in game 2, in game 3, they are 100% just imperming your first Purrely. But in a game where your opponent hasn't been shown this, you can make them make a really tough mental decision by saying, you have to imperm my Purrely now, or you can save your imperm to be used on my Ghost Trick cards. And even at that, you're talking to them and you're not talking to them, but you're communicating to them that you don't have to commit to these. You don't have to commit hard to anything at the start of your turn. You can just adapt to whatever they're doing. And forcing them to make a decision on what they want to do means that you can adapt a lot more effectively to it. Now, the other thing about this is it's very nonchalant. Because if you make a whole, like, if you pronounce your phases properly, you're going to say Pretty Memory and draw phase. Your opponent's going to then associate. They're immediately going to be able to tell that you're playing around draw. And what that's going to achieve for you is they're not going to know if you're playing around imperm or not. And they're not going to know that this play is to stop you. Like, they don't know that this play is to bait your impermanence. Because in their mind, in your opponent's like idea of what you're doing, you could very well just be trying to insulate your Purrely and lock yourself into being able to XC summon. Because, like, if they don't imperm your Purrely right now, the only thing that's stopping you from immediately ranking up is a Ghost Ogre. And if they have that, you're likely going to be going into your Ghost Trick line anyways. You just take the free cards that you get to hand with that and go to Lily. However, if you decide to just go through Purrely and they have Ogre, then I guess they have Ogre. But this is what it is. It's just one of those ways that you can make your opponent commit to an idea. And making your opponent commit to doing something only to go and do something that's completely unaffected by that is the entire draw to playing this deck. There's two reasons to do it, and one of them is just you want to be able to make UDF because UDF's kind of crazy. Like normal Snake Eye Ash, yeah, I'll UDF. You'd never actually be detaching Utopic Future. But like, yeah, UDF effect, I'll negate that, and I'm taking your Ash, so you can't original away, you can't use its other effect or whatever. You have to get rid of it off my field first. And it's really nice like that. The other benefit to playing these Ghostrick cards is you get to play hand traps a lot easier. And that's great, because hand traps are really good. Hand traps are great right now. Board breakers just do not hit the same as hand traps. And I hate playing normal Purrely because you don't want to be playing hand traps because you don't want to be wearing down your hand. Whereas in this version of the deck, you're like, okay, normal Purrely, find a memory, pitch a card in my hand, and suddenly I have 2 free cards to pitch with my future memories. You only need 1 card in hand, and then your top deck in order to actually go off, which is obscene to me. And that's why I do play this version of the deck. Now, the other reason why you would be is that if you can open your copies of Shot, you can power through basically any amount of spot negation, like imperm effects. Because when you have Shot in the graveyard, every time you go for an Angel of Mischief, you're getting Doulahan's effect to add back a copy of Shot. So it doesn't matter how many imperms you run into, you're always making UDF. And that's enough against a lot of decks, like Tenpai for example. Unless they specifically Kaiju the thing, there's not a lot of outs that deck really plays to a UDF. Now, the other interesting thing about this is that... oh gosh, I can't think of what I was saying. The other interesting thing about this is... yeah, okay. So normal Purrely, right? Right now, people are playing in regular builds of Purrely. They're playing Crossout, like a small Crossout suite, and then Street. And Prosperity, and Terraforming. They are playing to disrespect hand traps so that they can disrespect more hand traps. But the cool thing about this is, in order to find Street, you have your opening 5, right? And then presuming you're going through 2 Purrelys, you have 2 lots of 3 cards in order to find a Street. Which you generally will. Oh my god, that's a terrible opener. You're generally finding a copy of Street as you dig through the deck with Purrely. You're generally kind of sculpting your hand passively as you work towards the Ghostrick combo if your opponent's not stopping your Purrelys. And you're also, once you find Street, the only things that are going to stop you are Nib plus Imperm. And that's kind of one topic to mention. If you're going to be playing this deck, you need to be pretty conscious of Nib. But you don't have to respect it. You have to understand that it's a card, and you have to understand the dynamic that this deck has with Nibiru, but you don't have to respect Nibiru. For example, if you open with multiple memories, and one of them is really, like, you want to make the XCs of one of them. For example, like Delicious or Sleepy, right? As long as you think that you can hit 1 Purrely, you can go Sleepy, pitch a card, and this is for decks that you know are going to be playing Nibiru. This is going to be for decks that you know are going to hope that you fear God. You go Lily effect. You have My Friend. You My Friend pay 5. And this is a line that I have done so many times in locals, and it's a line that won me multiple games at States. Is you go Street, you add Street, obviously. Activate Street. Your opponent doesn't imperm here, then you're in the clear. If your opponent does, you just go Delicious, you summon out another Purrely, and then you go the Ghostrick combo from there, and then you just don't respect Nibiru because you're going to wind up having a bunch of cards in hand to keep going after that. But you go Delicious, you pitch. Oh, sorry, you don't... you Lily, rank up. use whatever. Use this. And it helps if you have a Purrely in hand, or you have, like, even another memory. But you'll pitch your next worst card in hand, you'll go Purrely, you'll excavate. And now, the good case scenario is you find a memory. The bad case scenario here would be that you don't, and you, oh boohoo, you just attach another copy of Sleepy, you have a 5-mana Noir, and then 4 draws. This line is generally a lot better if you have a Purrely in hand, because, say, like, one of these cards is a Purrely, even if you do miss, like, you just wind up normalling another Purrely, you find another memory, and then you can go into the Ghostrick combo like that without pitching, basically, a whole hand. This is good if you have, like, a level 1 in hand. But if you make a threat at the start, right, you literally add My Friend, you add Street. What this essentially says to the opponent is, I have access to, say, Delicious Memory, or I have access to Pretty Memory, and rather than having to pass on this Purrely Noir, which is only good because it sets the trap and has Sleepy on it, you can tell your opponent that I'm going to get a better Xyz monster in Plump, or like maybe Happiness, or Beauty. I'm going to get a better Xyz monster out of this deal if you nib me, because my Street is just going to bring back a Purrely, and then my Friend is going to add back all of my memories. I'm going to go into another Xyz that you can't stop. I'm going to attach a bunch of materials to it if it's Delicious, or I'm going to have a negate up if it's Beauty. I'm still going to have My Friend. I'm still going to have a big Noir. I'm just not going to have UDF, but that's fine. You're going into the Ghostrick line in order to force a Nibiru while you have an Purrely up. If you have access to both Street and My Friend, which My Friend just finds Street, you're winning. Your opponent can't stop that, and it's honestly foolish of them to try and nib you just because you're forcing it. They should just let you go through the Ghostrick line, they should just let you assemble your board, and then just hope that they can be able to stop it, because you're only going to make it better if you get nibbed. You're only going to make a better cat, you're only going to make a bigger Noir, you're only going to get a negate out of it, you're only going to get extra draws out of it. Because the Noir, the little Noir, is only good because it sets the trap from deck and it has a Sleepy Memory attached to it. Once you have the trap set from deck, either of these are going to be able to have a Sleepy Memory attached to it if you have My Friend Purrely access and your Noir gets outed. I know this is really hard to comprehend, and if I were trying to make this a better video, I would have written a script, but frankly, this is just the details about this deck that I find the most important about it, and the whole philosophy as to why I play this deck, because it's a player check. Game 1, they're just going to be imperming your Purrelys mindlessly, and you're going to go into the Ghostrick combo, add your copy of the shot, go into Lily, and they're like, ah, fuck, I'm out of imperms. And then by Game 2, you suddenly have this idea in their head that you're going into this Ghostrick line, and they have to be able to stop your Ghostrick Angel of Mischief. And then you can activate something like Street in your main phase and say, are you going to stop my Ghostrick engine, or are you going to stop my Purrely cards? And they kind of just, they have to make a decision then and there, and you can make your decisions based on that. And then if you get to like a Game 3, you have more info on the opponent, you have all the side deck info, and you're still playing mind games on your opponent by saying that you essentially don't have to commit to either direction, because at this point in the match they're going to grow to understand that. And if you're really ballsy, or if you're siding Dimension Shifter like I was at States, one cute thing that you can do is you can just side out shot. Because if the Ghostrick engine isn't going to be doing anything for you but putting Fear of God in your opponents, you can just side out shot and be like, yeah, okay, I'm just playing Purrely with 18 generics. Kill me. Like, it's the adaptability that helps. The only downside to playing this variant of the deck is extra deck space. You can't really run Prosperity, but you don't really want to. You can't really run more than one of any of these cats. but you kind of can, because this could also be just a smaller cat. I generally advise either Plump or Beauty because they're both very multifaceted. Beauty is just really good at going second and first, and so is Plump. And those are like the main downsides to this. The other downside is that if you don't open Shot, you can accidentally play really hard into like an Ash Blossom or an Imperm, because the Ghostrick combo does eat Imperm or Ash and then just do nothing if you don't have access to Shot, or if your opponent like refuses to stop your Purrelies, which they might be doing in game 2. But you kind of just... I wouldn't advise playing this if you don't have an understanding of how player psychology works in Yu-Gi-Oh! And you don't understand how people tend to react to gameplay or tend to react to threats being put on the board. It's more something that you have to have experience with in a 1v1 setting, and you have to have kind of an experience with the player psychology and how people tend to approach the game in order to be able to option select into optimal lines with this deck and choose optimally what you want to do with your cards. And that's kind of it. The deck itself is nothing too special. The deck is just a value engine attached to a value engine with disruption coming from either axis. But the fact that you have two different strategies going on means that you can feign committing to one of them and then commit to the other once your opponent commits to stopping one. It's a two-pronged attack, and I really like that. I tend to play... Anyone who plays many games against me tends to know that I like hiding information, and I like not giving my opponent info, and I want my opponent to misplay while thinking, and correctly thinking, that it's optimal to do. And I do that on Drytron all the time. I will force people to activate their nibs, and then I'll go, okay, Tribute Summon Choju, or when Baron was unbanned at normal Diviner, normal Saki Tama, and then go into Baron, and then I'm like, what you gonna do now? Like, I love forcing interaction and then going a completely different direction, and I love that Purrely allows me to do that in this format. I don't feel like many decks get to, because when you play something like Snake Eye, your opponent is interrupting you with the sole express understanding that you could have something else, but they know that's something else. They're always playing with perfect knowledge. Whereas into this deck, even someone with an intimate knowledge as to how this deck works is never going to understand what your next move is unless they know who you are as a player, and they also know exactly what's in your hand. You can hide information really well in this deck by just using the cards that your opponent can't see. And that's what I love about it. I'd advise picking up this deck. I do think that Ghost Tricks are the way to go with this deck, because it means that you don't have to play shit like Crossout, you don't have to play shit like Prosperity, and you can just focus on playing hand traps and disrupting your opponent rather than relying on certain border breakers and one-ofs that are in your like Crossout suite. And it's great fun. People love when you summon out Ghost Trick monsters against them, and the hilarious reactions you get when you beat someone's ass with Ghost Trick cards, making people who are playing decks like Snake Eye and Tempai say, wow, damn, those Ghost Trick cards are crazy, is amazing, and I love the feeling that this deck brings. But I can very much understand this not being for you. It's linear but not, and it's kind of Towers Turbo as Purrely is, but right now, given how cheap the deck is, I would advise picking it up. The only expensive cards that I would say are mandatory for this deck are Zeus and UDF, and I guess Anima if you count that. But really, other than that, it's so open, and with the accessibility of Purrely as an engine right now, there's not really a better time to pick this deck up. I'm always going to be putting forth the Purrely propaganda. So, yeah, I'm gonna throw this on YouTube now, no cuts, no whatever, because nothing really interrupted me this whole time that I was rambling, so I'm not bothered to go back and edit this. But if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm on, just on Discord or whatever, because I'm not going to be checking the YouTube comments on this shit. But, yeah, have a good one.